Golden Age stars who beat their wives publicly. Did you know many old Hollywood stars had extremely bad temper? They had so bad temper that they used to beat their wives almost every other day. It's the story of 13 of Hollywood's most revered male stars who lived double lives, charming the public while terrorizing their wives. These are not tales of simple, unhappy marriages or heated arguments. They are accounts of prolonged abuse, protected by a powerful system that valued box office numbers and public adoration over women's safety and well-being. 1. Errol Flynn. To audiences in the 1930s and 40s, Errol Flynn was the very definition of a dashing hero. With his athletic build, mischievous grin, and fearless energy, he was cinema's ultimate swashbuckler. In films like Captain Blood and The Adventures of Robin Hood, he battled evil villains and rescued damsels in distress with a sword in one hand and a roguish wink in the other. He was the embodiment of masculine adventure, a man who lived life to the fullest and inspired audiences to do the same. But the women in his actual life weren't rescued by Errol Flynn. They often needed rescuing from him. Behind the charismatic hero was a deeply troubled man with a volatile temper and a predatory streak that the studio system worked overtime to conceal. Flynn was married 3 times, and each marriage followed a similar pattern of control, infidelity, and explosive alcohol-fueled rage. His first wife, French actress Lily Demita, experienced the early manifestations of his behavior. Colleagues and friends reported witnessing Flynn's terrifying jealousy and controlling behavior, which often escalated into public arguments and physical intimidation. The marriage, which lasted from 1935 to 1942, finally dissolved under the weight of his constant cheating and increasingly erratic behavior. His second wife, Nora Eddington, endured even worse. She later described living in a constant state of fear, never knowing what might trigger one of his violent rages. By his third marriage to actress Patrice Wymore, Flynn's health was failing from years of hard living, but the pattern of intimidation and control remained unchanged. The most disturbing chapter of Flynn's private life involved his mistress, actress Carol Landis. In 1948, after a particularly vicious argument where Flynn had reportedly ended their relationship, the 29-year-old Landis took her own life with an overdose of sleeping pills. Flynn's reaction was chilling. After discovering her body, his first call was not to the police or an ambulance, but to his studio's publicity department to manage the crisis. He then left the scene before authorities arrived, a cold, calculated move to distance himself from the tragedy. This callousness reflected the deeper cruelty his wives described. Beyond the domestic violence, Flynn's attitude toward women was deeply predatory. In 1942, he was charged with statutory rape for allegedly assaulting 2 underage girls. Though he was acquitted in a sensational trial that the studio spun into a victory, the trial exposed his casual disregard for boundaries and his sense of entitlement. Warner Brothers invested millions in Flynn's heroic image, used its full power to suppress negative stories and protect its bankable star. The man who represented chivalry and courage on screen was, in reality, a deeply damaged individual who left a trail of broken women in his wake. 2. Bing Crosby. For millions of Americans, Bing Crosby was the voice of comfort and joy. His smooth, warm baritone was the soundtrack to the holidays, with White Christmas becoming an enduring standard. With his pipe, cardigan sweaters, and easygoing demeanor, he projected an image of wholesome, paternal warmth. As the star of the Road to Pictures with Bob Hope, he was the affable everyman. He was, in short, the ideal American dad that post-war audiences desperately wanted to believe in. But behind that carefully crafted facade of gentle paternalism lurked a man with a terrifying temper and a cruel streak that he inflicted on his first family. The truth didn't fully emerge until 1983, when his son, Gary Crosby, published a bombshell memoir titled Going My Own Way. The book painted a horrifying portrait of life inside the Crosby household, one completely at odds with Bing's public persona. According to Gary, Bing's discipline was not just strict, it was sadistic. He didn't just spank his children, he beat them with instruments designed to cause maximum pain while leaving minimal visible marks. He beat us with belts, paddles, and his fists, Gary wrote, and our mother couldn't stop him. The most disturbing ritual involved weekly weigh-ins. If any of the boys had gained weight, they would be beaten with a special whipping strap their father called the switch. Bing even had the handle fitted with steel pellets to increase the agony. Gary's account also revealed the atmosphere of fear that enveloped his mother, Dixie Lee. While he didn't document specific instances of physical abuse toward her, he portrayed a woman who lived in constant intimidation, unable to protect her children from their father's rages because she herself was psychologically trapped by his unpredictable temper. Dixie, who died of ovarian cancer in 1952, never spoke publicly about her marriage, silenced by the era's expectations and the immense public adoration for her husband. When Gary's book was published, it caused a family rift and a public sensation. Two of his brothers, Philip and Dennis, confirmed the accounts of horrific abuse. The tragic fates of the other two brothers lend chilling credibility to the story. Lindsay Crosby struggled with depression and alcoholism for years before dying by suicide in 1989. Dennis Crosby also later took his own life. These tragic outcomes are the haunting legacy of a household ruled by fear, not love. While Crosby's second family, with actress Katharine Grant, reportedly experienced a much kinder home life, it doesn't erase the terror he inflicted on his first wife and children. The image of America's beloved father singing White Christmas remains one of Hollywood's most successful and disturbing deceptions. 3. Frank Sinatra. Frank Sinatra's voice was an instrument of seduction. It was intimate, cool, and seemed to speak directly to the heart of every woman who heard it. This musical persona, combined with his role as the leader of the Rat Pack, established him as the ultimate ladies' man, sophisticated, passionate, and utterly irresistible. He was the voice of American romance. The women who actually shared his life, however, experienced a very different Sinatra. One whose volcanic temper and physical aggression could turn romance into terror in the blink of an eye. His pattern of volatile behavior was an open secret in Hollywood, a secret protected by his immense fame, his studio, and his rumored connections to organized crime. His first wife, Nancy Barbato, endured the early years of this pattern. Married in 1939, long before he became Old Blue Eyes, Nancy witnessed his growing volatility as his fame skyrocketed. Friends reported seeing his verbal tirades against her, though she never publicly spoke of specific physical abuse during their marriage, which ended in 1951 due to his rampant infidelity. It was his tempestuous relationship with his second wife, actress Ava Gardner, that brought the violence into sharper focus. Gardner was a formidable star in her own right and far less willing to be silenced. In a rare moment of public candor for the time, she later admitted, "He hit me. It wasn't often, but it happened." This simple acknowledgement from a star of her stature would have been a career-ending scandal for Sinatra if not for the powerful shield of the studio system and the different social attitudes of the era. While Gardner was known to have a fiery temper herself, the power dynamic was inherently unequal. Police were allegedly called to their home during some of their most violent fights, But like many domestic disturbances involving powerful celebrities, these incidents were quietly handled without official reports or charges. Sinatra's pattern of intimidation and control continued in his later marriages to Mia Farrow and Barbara Marx. While the physical elements may have decreased as he aged, the emotional abuse, the shouting, the jealousy, the controlling behavior remained a constant. The contrast was stark. The man who was crooning tender love songs to millions was coming home and subjecting the women who loved him to fits of rage and fear. The studio system and his own formidable power had placed him above accountability, allowing him to maintain his public image as a romantic icon while his private life was anything but. 4. Alfred Hitchcock. Alfred Hitchcock didn't act in his films, but he was one of Hollywood's most recognizable and revered figures. The portly, enigmatic master of suspense terrified audiences worldwide with classics like Psycho, Vertigo, and Rear Window. His public persona was that of a brilliant, if slightly macabre artist, a puppet master of cinematic fear. But Hitchcock's obsession with control and psychological torment wasn't confined to the screen. His most disturbing real-life horror story involved his discovery and leading lady, Tippi Hedren. After seeing her in a commercial, Hitchcock plucked the unknown model from obscurity, determined to make her his new star and his new obsession. During the filming of The Birds in 1962, Hitchcock's professional attention curdled into a creepy, predatory obsession. When Hedren rejected his advances, his behavior turned from controlling to actively cruel. In the now famous attic scene, where Hedren's character is attacked by birds, Hitchcock allegedly instructed the crew to use real mechanical birds tied to her with wires, despite her assurances that the safety glass was sufficient. For 5 days, she was pelleted with the birds, suffering cuts and a near breakdown. Hedren later said, "I was never so frightened in my entire life." His torment didn't stop on set. He began surveilling her, had his assistants report on her every move, and would make lewd and humiliating comments to her. When she refused his advances for the final time, he refused to release her from her contract, effectively putting her career on hold and blacklisting her in the industry for years. He told her, "I'll ruin your career." And he did his best to make good on that threat. His power was absolute, and his complicity was shared by his wife, Alma, who was also his longtime collaborator. Alma was aware of her husband's obsession and cruelty, but did nothing to stop it, choosing instead to protect the facade of their happy marriage and her husband's genius. Hitchcock's abuse of Tippi Hedren was a chilling display of how power in Hollywood could be weaponized, turning the dream of stardom into a real-life nightmare for a woman who dared to say no. 5. George Sanders. George Sanders built an entire career on being delightfully wicked. With his cultured British accent and a talent for delivering cutting remarks with surgical precision, he was the perfect cad. Audiences loved to hate him in films like All About Eve, where he won an Academy Award for his portrayal of the cynical theater critic Addison DeWitt. His on-screen cruelty was so artful it was entertaining. For his wives, however, there was nothing entertaining about Sanders's cruelty. The same verbal precision that made him an effective villain became a weapon of systematic psychological destruction in his marriages. His brand of abuse was rarely physical. It was far more insidious. His most famous wife, actress Zsa Zsa Gabor, provided the most detailed public accounts of their life together. In her autobiography and interviews, she described living with a man who used his intelligence and verbal dexterity not to entertain, but to demolish her self-esteem. "He belittled and humiliated me constantly," she claimed. Sanders would criticize everything from her appearance to her intelligence, often doing so in front of friends for maximum humiliation. He seemed to derive a quiet satisfaction from identifying her insecurities and exploiting them with comments that appeared witty to observers but delivered maximum psychological damage to her. This pattern of verbal evisceration continued in his subsequent marriages to actress Bonita Holmes and, in a bizarre twist, Zaza's sister Magda, a union that lasted only 32 days before she filed for divorce, citing his mental cruelty. Sanders never raised a hand. He didn't have to. His words were weapons, carefully chosen to inflict the deepest possible wounds. He created an atmosphere of constant criticism that left his partners perpetually insecure and off balance. The entertainment industry of the era had no framework for recognizing this type of emotional abuse as a serious problem. It was often dismissed as merely his famous wit operating in private. But for the women who lived with it, it was a slow, grinding form of torture that left lasting scars. 6. Desi Arnaz. As Ricky Ricardo on I Love Lucy, Desi Arnaz became America's favorite Cuban-American. His charming accent, his exasperated, "Lucy, you got some splaining to do," and his obvious love for his zany wife made him one of television's most beloved husbands. Together, he and Lucille Ball created a comedic empire, and their on-screen chemistry felt so real that audiences believed they were watching a genuine, loving marriage. The reality behind television's most famous couple was a much darker and more painful story. Lucille Ball never publicly claimed physical abuse, but those close to the couple, including friends and biographers, have described a relationship fraught with violent outbursts, property destruction, and screaming matches that left Ball in fear. The core issues were Arnaz's chronic infidelity and his heavy drinking. His constant cheating created a deep well of hurt and insecurity in their marriage. When he drank, his jealousy and anger would explode. Friends described incidents where an intoxicated Arnaz would smash dishes, break furniture, and engage in tirades that could last for hours. While Ball never publicly stated that Arnaz struck her, those close to her reported that she sometimes feared for her safety during his worst episodes. What made the situation impossible for Ball was that their personal relationship was inextricably linked to their professional one. As co-owners of Desilu Productions, they were business partners who had built a television empire together. Leaving the marriage wasn't just a personal decision. It was a complicated business negotiation that could potentially damage her career and the company they had both worked so hard to build. She was, in many ways, trapped. CBS and Desilu had a massive financial incentive to maintain the illusion of the happy Arnaz-Ball marriage. The authenticity of their on-screen relationship was crucial to the success of I Love Lucy. So, the problems were concealed. The narrative focused on temperamental differences, and the public continued to believe in the fairy tale. When Ball finally divorced Arnaz in 1960, the story was that they had simply grown apart, a far more palatable explanation than the truth of the emotional abuse she had endured for 2 decades. 7. Charlie Chaplin. Charlie Chaplin was arguably the first global movie star. His iconic creation, The Little Tramp, with his bowler hat, cane, and heart of gold, was a symbol of innocence, resilience, and the triumph of the little guy. He made the world laugh and cry without ever speaking a word. His public persona was that of a creative genius, a lovable underdog who had conquered the world through talent and charm. But the man behind the tramp had a deeply troubling and predatory private life, particularly when it came to his relationships with women. Chaplin had a well-documented pattern of pursuing very young, often vulnerable women, engaging in relationships where the power imbalance was immense. His first 2 marriages, to Mildred Harris and Lita Gray, ended in scandal and bitterness. He was 29 when he married the 16-year-old Harris. He was 35 when he married the 16-year-old Gray, who became pregnant and was pressured into marrying him. Their marriage was deeply unhappy, with Gray later describing Chaplin's controlling nature and cruel sexual demands. The most jarring example of this pattern was his fourth and final marriage, to Una O'Neill. Chaplin was 54 years old when he married the 18-year-old O'Neill, daughter of famed playwright Eugene O'Neill. The age gap was not just a number. It represented a lifetime of experience and power that Chaplin wielded over his young wife. While their marriage lasted and produced 8 children, those close to the family described a relationship where Chaplin maintained absolute control. Una, once a vibrant and independent young woman, essentially became a recluse, dedicating her entire life to serving her aging, jealous, and possessive husband. Chaplin's genius on screen was undeniable, but in his private life, he was a man who used his fame and power to isolate and control young women, ensuring their devotion by making them entirely dependent on him. The tramp may have fought for justice on screen, but at home, Charlie Chaplin was the one who made all the rules. 8. John Barrymore. John Barrymore was Hollywood royalty. Born into a legendary acting family, he was known as the Great Profile for his strikingly handsome features. He brought a level of classical training and theatrical intensity to early cinema, earning respect for his powerful performances in films like Grand Hotel and Dinner at 8. He was the embodiment of refined artistic talent. As his career progressed, however, a destructive force took over: alcoholism. Barrymore's drinking transformed him from a distinguished artist into an erratic, volatile man whose behavior grew increasingly abusive toward the women in his life. By the time of his final years, the hero had become a terror. His fourth wife, actress Elaine Barry, experienced the worst of this decline. Married in 1936, when Barrymore was already in the throes of late-stage alcoholism, she provided detailed accounts of his terrifying behavior. She described episodes of explosive rage where he would transform from a charming, intelligent man into a monster. He would smash mirrors, overturn furniture, and engage in screaming tirades that left her fearing for her safety. On more than one occasion, she was forced to flee their home and wait until he had sobered up before she dared to return. This pattern of alcohol-fueled violence wasn't new. His third wife, actress Dolores Costello, had left the marriage years earlier, partly due to his uncontrollable drinking and the abuse that came with it. Barrymore didn't age gracefully, he aged violently. The studios found it increasingly difficult to conceal his deterioration as his behavior became more public, and his health visibly failed. By the time of his death in 1942 at the age of 59, he had become a cautionary tale. A once great star whose personal demons had destroyed not only his career, but also his relationships, leaving his wives to pick up the pieces of the wreckage he left behind. 9. Spencer Tracy Spencer. Tracy was the picture of integrity and strength on screen. With his naturalistic acting style and a face that seemed to carry the weight of the world, he was the quintessential American everyman. He played priests, judges, and fathers, with a quiet authority that earned him 9 Academy Award nominations and 2 Oscars. He was one of Hollywood's most respected and prestigious actors. Off-screen, a very different Spencer Tracy emerged after the drinking started. Tracy was a severe alcoholic whose binges unleashed a completely different personality, one characterized by towering rages, cruel verbal assaults, and physically intimidating behavior. While he remained legally married to his wife Louise for 43 years, they separated early in his Hollywood career, primarily due to his alcoholism and abuse. He never divorced her, largely due to his strict Catholic beliefs. For the last 26 years of his life, he was in a relationship with actress Katharine Hepburn, one of Hollywood's most celebrated love stories. But Hepburn's private accounts, shared with friends, revealed a much more troubled reality. She spoke of walking on eggshells during his drinking episodes, afraid of triggering his unpredictable anger. While she never publicly claimed he physically assaulted her, she described situations where she feared violence might erupt. His drinking problem was an open secret in Hollywood, but MGM's powerful publicity department worked tirelessly to conceal the full extent of his abusive behavior to protect his image as a man of moral authority. The studio had too much invested in Tracy's dignified persona to allow the truth of his alcoholism and the terror it caused to tarnish their valuable star. 10. Robert Mitchum. Robert Mitchum defined cool. With his heavy-lidded eyes, laconic delivery, and an air of unflappable detachment, he was the ultimate anti-hero. He brought a unique, lazy intensity to roles in films like Night of the Hunter and Cape Fear, creating a persona that was both dangerous and deeply compelling. He was the man who never lost his composure. In his private life, however, Mitchum's cultivated nonchalance often gave way to a volatile temper, especially when fueled by alcohol. His 57-year marriage to Dorothy Mitchum, which lasted from 1940 until his death in 1997, was a testament to her endurance. But it was far from peaceful. Biographers and those close to the couple have reported that Mitchum's drinking would trigger arguments that sometimes escalated to physical confrontation. Dorothy Mitchum was a woman of her time and maintained remarkable public discretion about their troubles, rarely speaking of the difficulties she endured. But friends described a pattern of Mitchum's alcohol-fueled rages that turned their home into a chaotic and frightening environment. His 1948 arrest for marijuana possession, a major scandal at the time, was just one public glimpse into his rebellious and often self-destructive behavior. The studio system, while initially shocked, managed to spin the incident into part of his bad boy image, making it a marketable part of his persona. This created a bizarre situation where hints of his volatility actually enhanced his appeal, while the real-life consequences of his behavior were absorbed privately by his wife, who had little recourse against a powerful, abusive husband protected by an enabling industry. 11. Rex Harrison. Rex Harrison was the picture of sophisticated British elegance. Whether playing the refined Professor Henry Higgins in My Fair Lady or the whimsical doctor who talked to animals in Dr. Dolittle, he projected a cultured charm and wit that made him one of Hollywood's most distinguished leading men. This polished exterior, however, concealed a man whose cold cruelty and emotional brutality left a trail of psychological wreckage. Harrison's relationships with women were defined by a pattern of vicious, emotional abuse. His affair with actress Carol Landis ended in tragedy when she committed suicide after a heated argument with him in 1948. His cold, calculating response, calling his publicist first, then leaving the scene, was a chilling indicator of his character. Throughout his 6 marriages, a consistent picture emerged of a man who specialized in making women feel worthless. His third wife, actress Kay Kendall, experienced perhaps the most disturbing form of his manipulation. When Kendall was diagnosed with leukemia, doctors recommended not telling her to avoid causing distress. Harrison married her, but maintained the deception about her fatal condition until her death in 1959. Friends reported that he used his knowledge of her terminal illness as a form of control, sometimes making cryptic remarks that confused and frightened her while reminding him of his absolute power in the relationship. This psychological manipulation was a particularly insidious form of abuse, using her literal life expectancy as a secret he controlled. Charming in public and brutal in private, Harrison's story is a stark example of how emotional abuse can be just as devastating as physical violence, leaving scars that are invisible but no less real. 12. Wallace Beery. Wallace Beery was one of MGM's most reliable and beloved stars. He built a career playing lovable tough guys with hearts of gold. His gruff exterior always seemed to hide a deep well of kindness, a persona perfected in his Academy Award-winning role in The Champ, where he played a down-and-out boxer devoted to his son. Audiences adored him. But behind this carefully crafted image of rough-edged decency lurked a man with a history of horrific violence toward women. His first wife, silent film star Gloria Swanson, told a story that stood in stark contrast to the lovable characters Beery portrayed. Their marriage was brief, lasting from 1916 to 1918, but it left a lasting trauma. In her 1980 autobiography, written over 60 years after their divorce and long after Beery's death, Swanson made a shocking allegation. She claimed that Beery, enraged that she was pregnant, had punched her in the stomach with such force that it caused her to miscarry. This devastating accusation, if true, was not just domestic abuse, but a criminal act. Swanson's decision to wait until both she and Beery were gone before making the claim lends it a chilling credibility. She had nothing to gain and was simply setting the historical record straight. MGM, which later turned Beery into a beloved star, had a powerful motive to ensure such stories never saw the light of day. The studio successfully manufactured an image of Beery as a gentle giant, a complete fabrication that allowed him to have a long and celebrated career. The man who made audiences cry with his portrayal of a loving father was, according to Swanson, a monster who had no problem using his fists on a pregnant woman. 13. James Mason. James Mason brought a unique brand of refined menace to the screen. His distinctive, velvety voice and penetrating gaze allowed him to create some of cinema's most memorable villains and complex characters. Even in heroic roles, there was an intensity and intelligence that suggested a controlled, dangerous quality beneath a polished surface. He was the epitome of the sophisticated British actor. In his private life, Mason's controlled demeanor masked a different kind of intensity. A calculated, methodical cruelty toward his wife, Pamela Mason, that manifested as sustained psychological warfare. Their marriage lasted from 1941 to 1964, and Pamela's later accounts described a husband who rarely shouted or engaged in physical intimidation. Instead, he waged a slow, grinding campaign of control and humiliation. Mason specialized in a more insidious form of abuse. He would use his considerable intellect and verbal skills to deliver devastating critiques disguised as reasonable commentary. He maintained rigid control over every aspect of their household life, from finances to social connections, while consistently diminishing Pamela's contributions, opinions, and needs. Friends described their marriage as constant psychological warfare. He wasn't a brute, he was a slow-burn kind of cruel. This distinction captures the unique nature of his alleged abuse. It was less immediately identifiable than a physical assault, but its persistent, inescapable nature was potentially just as harmful, like water slowly eroding stone. The entertainment industry of the era had no framework for recognizing this sophisticated form of emotional torture. By the time Pamela spoke out after their divorce, Mason's established reputation largely insulated him from any professional consequences. His story is a powerful illustration of how domestic abuse can manifest through intellect and control, leaving deep and lasting psychological damage without ever leaving a visible mark.